Welcome back to Media7, where we're engaged in a post-mortem on media coverage of the Bain trial with Martin van Bain, Bruce Ansley and Jock Anderson. Now, Bruce, we were talking about Joe Karam before the break. He's really come out swinging since the verdict. In the Campbell Live interview, he even suggested a conspiracy. He said that Justice Tipping shouldn't be a judge.
He did.
Have we heard
He talked about irresponsible reporting, but...
He did. Have we heard rather too much of Joe Karam? He seems to have been as big a character in this case as David Bain has.
Bigger, really. I mean, who did the cameras focus on when the guilty verdict was announced?
Well, they couldn't point at David Bain.
Well, nonetheless, that was all Joe's show. It was Joe's show as he took everybody out the door. He was busy instructing David on what he could do and what he couldn't say. At the party afterwards that John Campbell went along to, he was running everything. And ever since then, it's been Joe who's fronted up. It's Joe who's calling names. It's Joe who's explaining, where people who think David actually did it have got it wrong. Joe's pretty hot under the collar. He gets, I know from personal experience that Joe gets extremely hot under the collar if you disagree with him.
As Paul Holmes has noted.
Yeah, well. Yeah, although it was Paul who, we were talking before about the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal's got a bad track record on this. The Court of Appeal and the Privy Council at first supported the suppression order. Holmes went to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal does an about face and rules that the evidence on incest, etc., can be published. But back to Joe, I wonder where he's going to go from here. He's made himself a superstar over this. He's done admirably. I mean, that kind of conviction and that kind of, executive ability has to be thoroughly admired. But the huge question here is, why, what was in it for Joe? Now, John Campbell asked about that last night. Why have you done it? I mean, he's been asked that question more often than David Bain has. And why have you done this? Joe said, well, both you and I know part of the answer to that question, or words to that effect, and they both, totted off in this sort of wee conspiracy of silence.
Now, actually, we're talking about asking questions of David Bain. That's a good one. You were at that press conference on the steps of the court. No one asked him whether he did it. No one said a word out of turn.
No. I must admit, I had another reporter next to me, and I said, shall I ask him about the gloves, or shall I ask him if he did it? But it would have gone down like a lead balloon, and someone said to me, look, you asked that and you'll be lynched.
Was it really that kind of atmosphere?
It was a victory celebration. It would have been, raining on Joe and David's parade, and yeah, it would have taken a very, very gutsy journalist to do it. And I think in the end it would have been fruitless, because all you would have done was you would have been just got a blank stare, and you might have got some insulting remark, and you probably wouldn't have achieved anything except the fact that you would have shown that they weren't going to answer that sort of question.
I think that this is probably the one question that everyone in New Zealand wanted asked, and no one is asked at all. David, did you do it? And my impression, as I said earlier, my impression is only from what I saw on TV and radio and papers, is that the entire media were all part of a celebration. David has won, David has got off, David is innocent. Well, there are views on innocence, and David was given the benefit of a reasonable doubt, and I would take it no further than that. But I would still, personally, if he was here, I would want to ask him, did you do it? Because I think that's what probably many people in New Zealand want that question asked, and they'd be intrigued to know what his answer would be. The other thing that strikes me is that if we had, in this extremely rare occasion, where a man who has proclaimed his total innocence from day one, he didn't do it, he wasn't there. He has nothing to fear if he goes into the witness box and tells the jury and the public, I'm an innocent man. It's not as if
he did in the first trial.
Yeah.
But he has
why didn't he do
right
it? Why didn't he do it in the second one?
No one asked him. I have to say, though, one group of people who were not shy about voicing their opinion on this case was members of the public with internet connections.
Absolutely.
I cannot recall a case like this where there have been so many people publicly doubting a verdict. No, half the country doesn't seem to accept this. Can you recall anything comparable?
No, not at all. And probably in the States it would be close to OJ. But and the thing about you know, the internet stuff and Facebook and stuff is that while there are warnings and threats being put out, be careful you don't do anything defamatory, there's nothing you can do about these things anyway. And this will grow like a tidal wave, a tsunami of opinions, and people are diametrically opposed. You know, there's people saying, you know, we love David, we hate David, you know, he did it, you know, blah, blah, all the whole works. This is going to go on. And I think there's nothing he can do about it. There's nothing Joe can do about it. There's nothing anyone can do about it.
Because it wasn't just the Facebook pages,
No,
it was the actual discussion
everywhere.
forums on the
Yeah.
newspaper websites.
Yeah.
And they left it there. Did they make the right decision opening it up to the public like that, to people who had not been there?
I think in a case of this kind, you can't stifle public opinion, however misinformed or ill-informed or misguided it might be. I think it's a bullet that has to be bitten by Bain and his cohorts. And they say, look, there's going to be a lot of opinion out there. Let it go, let it roll, see what happens. We'll still be discussing and arguing about David Bain long after we've forgotten about Arthur Thomas. That's my view. You know, 5 years after the Bain trial, 10 years after the Bain acquittal, blah, blah, blah. My view is let the people have their say and let it all hang out.
Bruce, why do you think it captured, I don't know whether the public imagination is quite the right word, but certainly the public sense of indignation in either direction? It seemed to have some cultural impact that other prominent cases haven't had, right from the day of the Jersey. What was it about this case?
Yeah, well, I suppose the number of deaths for a kick-off. I mean, I was just trying to think if there had been a similar case, it would be massive. Dunedin is no stranger to mass murder. Incidentally, it's burned the crime scene twice in a row, which is quite an issue in this trial. I think it's partly David's personality. He's a fairly enigmatic figure, but the big thing is that nobody who sat through that first trial could work out why. The only person who's had a crack at that is James McNeish, and he concluded that David had various psychiatric issues that he had to
had
deal
an
with.
elaborate theory, didn't he?
He did have an elaborate theory, and he felt obviously that David was the decision was the right one. Yeah.
Martin, something else I think was one of a number of unprecedented things about this case was perhaps the behaviour of the jury. We've talked off the record to some of the journalists who were there in court, and they were frankly appalled by some of the things the jury did. There was the hug, there was the going to the party, there were notes passed. One of the jurors talked to David Fisher from the Herald on Sunday. Have the goalposts been moved here? Because this seems unprecedented.
Yeah, I'm not sure what goalpost you're talking about, but I've never seen a jury behave like this. I mean, there have obviously been cases where jurors have approached the media and where the media have approached jurors, but in a case like this, where there were so many emotions running and it was so controversial, for two jurors to go to the party, for two of them to be seen with David outside the court, one of them hugging him, one of them shaking his hand, and then for that juror to go on radio and in the newspaper, I just can't recall a case like it.
Would you have had the opportunity to interview one of the jurors had you so chosen?
If they'd approached us, there would be nothing stopping us talking about things like the pressures on the juror, how difficult they found the evidence, issues like payment, those sort of general issues. There is the case law which says that you're not allowed to discuss deliberations and for a variety of reasons.
Nor are we allowed to approach the juror, are we?
I would argue
merry little dance in the Herald that they approached us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Walking along the street, apparently, yes.
Side by side.
yes.
Jock, obviously the crucial thing in the future of any debate about this case is what happens with the judgment over the suppressed evidence and whether that's made public. What happens from here? I mean, we've got the memorandum from the court. How long before this gets resolved?
Well, I suspect myself that the court won't make an instant decision. There is obviously pretty weighty and complex issues for them to determine, because the court knows the explosive nature, and that was the word used to me today by somebody in the news media who knows what the evidence is. There is an explosive nature here. The court will be taking that into consideration very carefully. But bearing in mind that the Supreme Court is headed by Sian Elias, who has been on record a number of times in the past as being very much in favour of very open justice, and it hasn't been overly keen on keeping things, I call them secret or hidden. The lawyers have other words for it, more delicate expressions. So it wouldn't surprise me if they lift the lid. They may in fact have already had a good look at it and say, look, if the media come up with a good argument, or rather if Bain's team don't have a good enough argument, let's give it to them.
Now, Martin, your paper's already got a story about at least one of these pieces of evidence already written. I presume you know of the other media organisations who are preparing to go with the story. It's going to be a bit of a media blitz if the court decides in that way, isn't it?
Yes, it will be. Yeah, it'll be like verdict day all over again, I suspect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you said, Jock, I think you're right in saying this is a case we have far from heard the end of.
Absolutely.
Yes. Oh, thank you very much, gentlemen. We will leave the discussion here, but yeah, this will be a case that we talked about for one reason or another for many years to come. So thank you to Martin van Bainen, Bruce Ansley and Jock Anderson. After the break, student media, high times and low humour.